This is a quick how-to on how to download, install, and configure the EMC Storage Viewer 2.0 plugin for vSphere and vCenter 4.0. This is a simple and easy tool, and downloading and installing is simple and easy. Just go to the Symmetrics tools for VMware. That's one thing that's a little confusing about that is it's actually for all EMC platforms. You can see that there's the Storage Viewer binaries, including white papers on how to install it that are very, very handy dandy. So obviously you just click and download that installable, which I've already downloaded here. So I'm just going to indicate that I don't want to replace the file. The next thing that you need is you need to get Solutions Enabler. So later on you'll see how we do the installation for this, but Solutions Enabler is an API tool set for most EMC storage platforms and used by a broad range of tools to manage the storage arrays. So if you go to Software, Downloads, and Licensing, under Downloads with S, there's Solutions Enabler, and you'll see that there's Solutions Enabler builds for most major platforms. In this case, we're going to be installing it on a Windows VM, so we're just going to download the Windows x86 bits. You're going to be using 7.0, and if you're using a later version of Flare beyond Flare 28, you need to get version 7.0.1. So let's install the plugin and Solutions Enabler. This is a one-time task, so all the stuff that we're going to do here in these steps, you only need to do once. The important thing here is that with Solutions Enabler, you need to connect to the console. So if you're remotely connecting, just make sure that remote desktop connection is connecting to the console using the wack console, or if you're using later versions, wack admin login credentials. In this case, since we're installing it into a VM, there's another important consideration. And one thing that's a little bit counterintuitive to folks that have not used this before a little bit is that a lot of communication for management traffic for Symmetrics and Clarions is actually done in-band over the storage connection. So you need to present either a LUN to the VM either as a PRDM, or here what I've done is I've used iSCSI within the guest. So there must be a LUN on the Solutions Enabler host that can be used for discovery and configuration. So double-clicking on the installer just starts the installation process. Again, Solutions Enabler is an API toolkit that's used for a lot of EMC software, like ones that manage replication cycles, control center, a broad set of capabilities, and it's licensed for customers once they're using almost any sort of EMC software. You can basically just take the defaults for the purpose of the EMC Storage Viewer. Only the most basic elements of EMC Solutions Enabler are actually used. It also actually has a whole slew of libraries that are used by tools for handling devices and volume management, bringing it up to the hosts. So this installation is just about complete. It's very, very short and very simple. The next step in the process is going to be to configure it so that it knows about which arrays we've got. So we'll open up a command window and we will navigate to the installation directory, which is Program Files, EMC, and then you'll notice that there's the SIM API and SIM CLI directory. The SIM CLI directory is the directory you're going to use. Again, even though it's referring to a Symmetrics, it's used by Clarions and by SIMs. This command here, SIM-LMF, is the thing that triggers the licensing process. So here we're going to input the licensing key. So now where do you get it? If you're using pretty well any EMC product, you already actually have a key. But if you don't, all you need to do is contact your nearest EMC colleague who can send an email to licensekeys@emc.com and request one for non-production use. So I'm inputting the key that I got through that process here. You could add additional license keys for additional functions if you wanted. So the next steps are the steps that are involved with configuring it for my specific Clarion. Since I'm using iSCSI here, I need to identify that this individual host is authorized to issue commands to my Clarion. So I'm adding this host specifically to the authorized host list for my Clarion. So I'm inputting the Clarion SP management IP address. and then the username and password for the individual Clarion. Now, one thing that's interesting is that the solutions enabler is actually something that it's possible to create secured gateway hosts. In other words, hosts that VMware teams and storage teams, neither of them kind of access, and it basically can be a secured platform. Just doing that here for both of the storage processor IP addresses. And then the last thing that you need to do is specify the management IP addresses. One thing that's very important is that on a Clarion, some traffic and configuration is done in band, and some is via the storage processor IP addresses. So we're just going to put the IP addresses explicitly into a text file that we're going to use for what's called an assisted discovery, which is the last step here. So we tell SIM Solutions Enabler to discover the Clarion and use the individual assisted discovery file that we just created. And you can see it's now discovering the Clarion at those IP addresses. If you've done everything correctly, including, remember that it must have a LUN presented from the array to that individual Solutions Enabler host, which can be a VM. And you can see that you'll get a positive done, and the entire process is now complete. That's really the hardest part of the whole process, and it is something you just need to do once. So if we now go and we do the last step, which is to install the storage viewer itself, it's again very, very simple. Next kind of finish install. So let's just do that exactly. Next, accept the license agreement. Next. That's the default install path, and off it goes, and that's pretty well it. The plugin is now installed, and what I'm now going to open is the VMware vSphere client. A key thing is that when you install, if the vSphere client is open, you're going to need to close it and reopen it to get the plugin installed, as is all the way with almost all plugins. So I'm inputting all my credentials here. Okay, fantastic. In fact, you'll notice here explicitly as soon as I install the certificate that one of the things that happens when you open it up is it actually discovers the plugin. So just remember, if you don't see the plugin in the plugins list, you'll just need to close and open your vSphere client. Now you'll notice that there's a new icon there in the home, the EMC storage icon. This basically allows you to configure stuff like a remote Solutions Enabler host. If it is remote, here we've installed it on the actual same host that we're using for the VIC client or the vSphere client. And you can also modify things like error logging levels, which can actually be fairly handy. And now it's installed, which means you've got several new tabs in various views. So just quickly walking through them here. Just note that you now have got the EMC Storage Viewer. It's plugged in. If you're not seeing the plugin, you should also go in here and just make sure that it's enabled. If you click on an individual host, you now have got an EMC Storage tab that gives you a lot more detail around data stores, array targets, and whether they're properly configured, and LUNs. So if we go here and we take a quick look, for example, at the LUN screen, you can now see all of the ones that are used. And by the way, that's a minor error that happens only if you have just Clarions and not Clarions and SIMs, or just SIMs. You can see and sort what LUNs are on the array, what are being used, what aren't being used. You can filter the views. You can get all sorts of information. If you click on the data stores and click on individual data store, it'll tell you what the details are of how that data store is actually being stored, whether it's a striped meta as it is here, whether it's thinly provisioned, how many paths you currently got used, whether you're using NMP or PowerPath, all those sorts of details. And if you click on targets, this is an area, by the way, where there's some additional stuff coming relatively here near term, which you can see by the unknowns and question marks. You can see whether the targets are actually properly configured, and details around them. What's the worldwide names, IP addresses, etc., etc., etc. Now, if you go and you click on an individual VM that's stored on EMC storage, you can see the virtual disks, and then you can actually see the actual LUNs that are supporting either that virtual disk on a VMFS volume, or you can see the relationships to individual physical mode RDMs. Thanks very much, and have a great day.